Our guest speaker today is Gabriella Cazares-Kelly, and she was elected to be Pima County Recorder in November of 2020 and began her administration in January of 2021. She leads an office that oversees voter registration, early voting, and document recording for Pima County. She is a proud union dues paying former public school educator and community organizer. She was inspired to run for office after encountering many systemic barriers preventing people from simply registering to vote. She is the first Native American to hold an elected Pima County office and the third Native American to hold a county level office in the state of Arizona. She's going to share her experiences as Pima County's recorder in this troubling time, most recently in preparing for, overseeing, and coordinating the recent 2022 primary and general elections here in Pima County. So let's give Gabriella a big, warm welcome.
Hey, Gabriella.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to make sure that I set the stage a little bit more for the recorder's office. Our office and the elections department are two separate offices, and a lot of people get us mixed up with one another. So I want to share some information about how our offices are different. In the preparations for the election, we are responsible for voter registration, which is changing party name, address, updating signature, and cancellations. This is voter roll list maintenance. We do this 24/7, 365. We do this every single day. We're already in the process of registering new voters as of today, as of immediately after the election. We determine the early voting sites, the location, the days and the hours, and we determine the mail ballot drop-off locations. We do not currently have unstaffed ballot drop boxes in Pima County, but that is something that we're interested in moving towards in the future. We verify signatures for petitions, initiatives, recalls and referendums, candidate petitions, and we do all of our training for our employees only. It's really important to know that we only facilitate early voting. So this is early voting site workers, people who are doing ballot processing, signature verification, couriers or phone operators, and we have something called site monitors, which are people who are keeping track of what's happening at each of our sites. This is different from election day and poll workers who only work one day. Our people will work the very minimum 5 days plus 2 days of training. So we have our people for a lot longer of a time. And for some of those people, we may have them for up to a month or even longer. During an election, we are mailing out alternative format ballots, braille and large ballot. We are continuously processing ballot requests, either over the phone or we have a web portal where we're able to do that. And we're signature verifying ballot affidavits. We do not open those ballots. We are only verifying the signature on the outside envelope. We do all of the early voting. All of early voting is considered just anything before the election day. So in-person voting by mail, emergency voting, or team voting. We also have emergency voting, which sounds very ominous, but really it's the same thing as early voting. Little form, little half sheet that you have to sign. And the Recorders Association really would like to get rid of that term as a whole, so it's not even that important. We maintain your ballot status information up until we turn it over to the elections department. At that point, it becomes anonymous and your ballot can no longer be tracked. And then we turn over ballots to the elections department. Right after an election, we provide data to the elections department, but they are ultimately responsible for the canvass, which is the official document that shows the election results. So a lot of people think that once there is a declared winner, that we simply stop processing ballots. It's not true. We will process every single ballot until we have met that requirement, and we are protected by state guidelines and deadlines. But nothing is actually official until the canvass is approved by the Board of Supervisors. And again, that document is created by the elections department, but we keep working. We tear down and we archive everything. And so I want to show you a little bit about some of our voter statistics. So in Pima County, we have 705,072 as of maybe last week or the week before. This number changes daily on a daily basis, and it depends on constituent documentation. They're always changing their voter registrations, and actually after 2 cycles of being inactive, we do remove certain folks who fall into very certain categories. So that number will drop down again, but in an election year will absolutely increase. So the total inactive voters, these are people who just had returned mail. They will be considered inactive voters unless they contact us, but they're still eligible to vote. They just need to be in communication with us. But really, we had 639,885 active voters eligible to participate. And we had 480,321 people who were signed up for the active early voting list. And those were people who automatically received a mail ballot through the mail. That's usually around 20,000 for a presidential year, so 18,000 or so. We had 2,561. That is a drastic reduction, and that was because of the move to vote centers, which was really an exciting move for us. So my office is mostly concerned with early ballots. So ballots that were returned to us before Election Day. There were 9,094 people who voted in person. Those were people who showed up at an early voting site, presented their identification, and were issued a ballot that was printed right then and there. The military and overseas voters, 45 days before an election, we are able to either mail or send an email ballot to voters who are under this specific protection. And they can actually, because some of them will receive it by email, they can print, fill it out, return it on the same day. We've actually had people return it on the very same day within an hour. So that starts us being in an active election 45 days before the election day. So 1,807 people, and that is both our military folks. Maybe they're stationed somewhere odd that is just not here in Pima County. Maybe it's somewhere international. Maybe it's a submarine. That number can. Those locations can vary wildly, and their connectivity is something that we have to pay special attention to. We had 42,507 ballots returned to us at our early voting sites. Those are people who simply walked in and dropped off ballots right there, at the door. They don't have to do anything other than just drop it off. We had returned mail. You see that we still had 236,000 pieces of mail that came back to us. So the majority of people are still voting by mail. That is very, very popular. What happens is our office goes to the Cherry Bell post office, and we pick up our mail every day. It gets picked up by couriers. It's separated specially just for us, and that's one of our biggest returns. Special early board. We had 29 voters in Pima County that required our assistance. These are people who for whatever reason, were unable to show up to vote in person or did not receive a mail ballot or could not return their mail ballot to us. So this may be somebody who is, maybe unexpectedly hospitalized. We did the majority of the runs that we did were for the hospitals, rehabilitation centers, or the jail. Any of those places that request where someone is unable to leave and there's no way to get them a ballot within that time frame, our office is able to connect that way. We received 44,000 ballots on election day, which was about 15,000 ballots more than the office had received in the 2020 presidential election. It was a significantly larger number of ballots that were dropped off on election day, which often have 2 envelopes that have to be processed. They take out the white envelope from the yellow envelope and discard the yellow, and then each one has to then get scanned, and then each one has to get individually signature verified by a human being, one by one. So it's an incredible amount of work that has to go into that. And we actually don't receive those ballots until the day after election day. So if any of you are dropping off your ballots on election day, know that it is not part of those initial reports because it needs to be processed so much more. And it definitely slows down those results. Ultimately, the total number of early ballots that we turned over to the elections department for tabulation was 333,304. I do want to make sure that you know that just because these ballots were returned to us does not mean that they were verified. Sometimes we receive weird things like we may receive a ballot affidavit. It feels like there's a ballot in there. We verify the signature, we turn it over to the elections department, and then the elections department will open it up and they'll find an old ballot from a different election, or they'll find just the instructions, or maybe there's nothing in there. Maybe it's a shopping list. So not everything gets verified. Another thing that happens is sometimes we'll receive mail ballots back, and there won't be an affidavit in there with any information tying the voter to the ballot. So we don't know who sent it. It's just a ballot with nobody's name on it. And so those are things that happen. So we just have to make sure that we're really careful. We're double checking everything when we send it off because that does happen oftentimes. And we actually, this cycle, received a number of ballots without any envelopes at all. It was just a ballot that was voted, thrown in the mail. And the post office, they know that no matter what, even if they receive, some people didn't put the white ballot affidavit inside the yellow, and they just put the white affidavit in the mail. The post office will see that and they will send it to us, and we get charged for it anyway. It's no problem. And they'll do the same thing for a ballot that is just separated from everything. But sometimes people just kind of forget those things. It happens. I want to make sure that I spend some time talking really about some accessibility things that most people don't know about our offices. So we have been really working very closely with several organizations that specialize in accessibility. So we've been working on having a relationship with the National Association of the Blind, the Tucson chapter. We've been in communication with their group, allowing time to utilize some of our voter assistance equipment. We've had additional trainings for our, We have additional trainings for our staff. This is actually a staff training where you can see here one of our staff members working on the accessibility machine that is it's a ballot marking device that allows people, and I'll go through this a little more, allows a touch screen, and you can also, it will also read out for you. And that way you're not having to fill in the bubbles for each of on the paper. You can just do a touch screen or use a joystick. And they are practicing with this equipment. This has been a really huge priority under my administration because these are devices that have existed and they've been there, and then someone will come in to ask to use it, and they'll say, oh, I don't know how to use this. And so that's been a problem. And so we're really trying to change that, trying to make it so that it's easy and people are really comfortable, our staff's really comfortable utilizing this. We spend a lot of time making sure that all of our communications are accessible. We really spend a lot of time on image descriptions, Spanish language versions, making sure things are presented in plain language so that people can understand what this means instead of a heavy reliance on, elections jargon. So we are very mindful of that for our website and our social media output and anything that we submit with the county communications office. And we're continuing to do that. So I want to show you a little bit more about our accessibility. Number one, we have just made the accessibility information much easier to find on our website. It's actually the very first button when you click on voter information on our website at recorder.pima.gov. And all of our tabs will have descriptions so that it doesn't say just something like button or next. It actually will say what the information is supposed to lead to. And that way somebody who maybe if they're a blind user and they're only listening to the audio, they're able to still get that information quickly. Of course, I want to highlight that voting by mail is an accessibility for all voters. We have no excuse vote by mail. They're trying to change that in the legislature. They are trying to make it so that only people who have a disability are able to, and then they have to prove that they have a disability, which is completely ableist and not in anything that we want to support. This should be available. We have had 2 decades of really successful vote by mail in Arizona, and we want to continue that. That allows people to vote from the privacy of their own home and spend more time on their ballot and receive assistance if they need it from somebody of their choosing. And the postage is paid, and they're still able to drop off in person if that's something that they want to do. There is a space on the ballot affidavit where someone can sign if they assist a voter. And that's really if they're the one filling in the bubbles and somebody else is verbally saying it, that's all that is needed. We'll usually call the voter the first time we see that. We'll make sure that they intended to submit this ballot. And really, if we're seeing something like, someone had a stroke and they can't write their full name, but they can make a mark and they can write an X. We're going to just call and verbally confirm that that's, someone intended to mark their ballot and that they did it in the way that they wished. And then we can put a note in their voter file so that they don't have to do that every time. And every time we see that they've made their mark that's resembling that, we will accept it and it will be good to go. We have large print ballots. All of the ballots are printed by the elections department. They design the ballots. However, we're responsible for mailing it out. And so in this photo, you'll see on the right-hand side is a standard size ballot. I think this one in particular was a 14 and a half. Oops. I think this one was a, whoops, where's my mouse there? This is a 14-inch ballot, and this one is about double that size, and you see that there's a significant change in the type font size. And those are mailed out with all of the accompanying resources. Oh. And we also have Braille ballots that we mail out as well. So these come kind of in a booklet form, and in a general election, it's a multiple booklets, one for each for the general election, and then one also for the propositions, and if there's any additional jurisdictional elections within that time frame, those will all be sent to the voter. They are able to circle the Braille choices, and then when we only verify signatures, and we call people before we send out the mail ballot or the Braille ballot to let people know that they're on the way. And then when they're returned, they will be two people from opposite party will then recreate a new ballot with the voter's intention, and those two will agree. The same thing happens with the Braille ballot. Those are two people who can read Braille, and they will, from opposite party, and they will agree that this is the voter's intention, and they will move it forward with a new marked ballot. So that can be read electronically. Our early voting sites, we like to encourage people to come use those early voting sites. We've done a simple thing, just being practical. People were finding that it was difficult to stand for a really long period of time. And so one of the requests that was made was, can we just have a table? Can we have a table and chair and some privacy screens? And that's what we did. We were able to set that up at every single location. And one of the coolest ways that I saw this used, of course, for our elders, somebody who broke an ankle, broke a foot, or somebody who just needs to sit. You don't have to explain why you need it. You just say, can I sit? Sure. But I did see a mom who had two children in their wagon. They brought their wagon to vote, and they had the two boys in the wagon. And then she had one more that she was holding. And at one point, I happened to glance over just as I'm working at this site, and she was sitting there breastfeeding, voting, and she had two kids in the wagon. It was just amazing. I think it was just, when we say multi-purpose, whatever you need, that was what this voter needed, and she was very happy to, get in and out of there, and that really worked for her and her family, and so she was able to vote that way. These are the wheelchair accessible ballot booths that I was talking about. This fits a wheelchair. It's a much wider stance, and it's a little lower to the ground. But of course, not everybody who comes in who needs to sit is going to have a wheelchair. So that's why we have the table. And then we have them next to any of the standard booths. So whatever is most comfortable for the voter. And, for a general election, we have a really long ballot. So for some people, they really just need to sit down and be able to be comfortable and take their time with that ballot. So we definitely want to make sure that we had that available, and it was a simple solution, and voters had a really positive response to that. So accessible voting services, this is the device that I'm talking about. This is called an express voting machine. It's pictured here without the privacy screen. That was just an oversight on my part when I was taking photos. But it also has a touch screen or a joystick. And again, we have had so much additional training for my staff. This is actually how I vote. I came to vote here at my location the very first time in the primary. And I said, I want to vote using the express voting machine. And there was panic. And that led me to recognize that nobody was feeling comfortable enough, that we needed more hands-on training for this. There was a little bit of additional work. And one of my staff members actually said, this feels like when my mother-in-law comes to visit because of the higher scrutiny. So now this is a thing. They know that the reporter is going to come visit. They don't know what site, but that I'm going to want to vote on this, and I expect to be treated just like everybody else, and that I shouldn't have to wait an additional amount of time to use this accessible device. So this is really exciting. We had people who, they would maybe mention, I have arthritis, I have a hard time writing things, or I have a hard time seeing things. I forgot my readers, or whatever the situation was. They didn't even have to explain to us why. If they just wanted to use this machine, they can. And it has headphones, so it will read it out. And the Secretary of State actually provides guidance to the Elections Department, and the Elections Department programs these, but to make sure that the names sound as close to the pronunciation as possible. They work really closely with the candidates so that they get the names correctly and for each area. And you're able to move around and do a final check before you submit. And what will happen is the ballot will print. It's on a piece of cardstock. And that's folded up and it's put into the ballot affidavit and it's sent over for tabulation. And there had been some concern about whether or not, only people with disabilities are going to have, this certain type of ballot format. But like I said, anybody can use it. I voted this way. But also, if we get a ballot in the mail, if the Elections Department has one that's been torn in half by a machine, or maybe there's just a lot of handwriting and it's not going through the tabulation device properly. Maybe it's a rip, maybe it's just not, maybe it's just not being read well. Maybe there's coffee stains on it or got rained on. They will have a 2-person team recreate that ballot using the ballot marking device, using this device, and those ballots will go through the machine just like any other. So this is a faster, more efficient way. It's very clean. I encourage you to try it. And also there's multiple languages available on this device. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier the team voting available to location-bound voters. So for hospitals, rehab, jail, or home, really, we try to be very mindful of who we're making sure this is the only option for a voter if they have their ballot at home and they have their daughter coming every day and they're caregiving for them. The daughter can take care of it, or you pop it in the mail or drop it off at an early voting site. This is only for people who really, there is no other option. So we do really try to limit this. We carefully vet people to make sure that there's no other alternative for them. And then we happily will come out there to people of opposite parties. And sometimes this can be as simple as, here's your ballot, and then, they fill it out and then they hand it back, they, signed with everything, here it is. And sometimes it may require an address change before that person, can get their ballot. Sometimes it requires our people filling in the bubbles for them and then signing the assistance portion. It really just depends on that voter. Sometimes it could just be a pickup. Somebody is in the hospital and they have their ballot and they have no ride, to get to the ballot, and none of their people can bring it or something. So they bring multiple ballots just in case there's an error made. They take up to 3, and they're very carefully secured and returned back during that time. The other thing that I just want to let you know, in this last election cycle, we were able to launch a text message verification system. You can now sign up for text message or email alerts on our website, which is recorder.pima.gov. What will happen is every time we're preparing for an election, you will get an email or an email and a text message saying, hey, your ballot's about to be mailed to you. And that way you can call us and say, oh, hold on, don't mail it to my Tucson house. I'm in Ohio right now. I need it sent somewhere else. And then we'll send you a text message alert or email alert saying your ballot is on its way, when we've received it back, when it's been signature verified, or if we're having an issue with your ballot and we need to talk to you. And then we'll send you a final text message when it's been turned over to the elections department. So this really takes a lot of peace of mind, gives people a lot of peace of mind. And we were able to sign up like 9,000 people for this already. And it was just launched only about a week or two before the general election. So this is a new service. I highly encourage you to sign up for that. And if you're having trouble with our doing it online, our system can kind of be picky. My name, for example, Cazares-Kelly, shows up as Cazares-Kelly. And if you are a nerd like me and you have that, you can play with it or whatever. But sometimes it's just really picky. Feel free to give us a call and we can look it up on our end and we'll get you signed up. But it's one phone number per person. So if you and your partner maybe share a phone, unfortunately, only one of you will be able to sign up for the service. But it is really effective and people love it. And like I said, you can do that for text message or email, and we love it. For upcoming elections, and I do want to acknowledge that there are no exact dates because we don't even have that up on our website. We don't have that information yet. But we are in 2023, we're looking for the city of Tucson primary election and, I have that on twice, primary and the general elections, of course, for 2023. It's important to know that the city of Tucson facilitates their own elections. However, our office provides them with data for the voter list that they use to send ballots out for their all-mail election. And we also verify signatures. So we're still going to compare those signatures to the ballot affidavits, and then we give them back to the elections department. So we're involved in the process, but we don't facilitate like we do in every other election. This is simply a city of Tucson function. And so questions about that specific election should always be directed to city of Tucson, unless it has to do with your voter file, which we maintain. No other jurisdictional elections have been announced as of today. That's me knocking on wood. And so we haven't passed any deadlines yet, so people can still announce that there are a special jurisdictional election. But we are already preparing for the presidential preference election of 2024, which will be in March of 2024, which is only 14 months away. We then will, of course, have the primary election and the general election. So 3 elections at minimum in 2024 already. And even just talking with my in-laws this weekend, I was trying to explain to my father-in-law last night the difference between a presidential preference election and a primary election. And most people confuse the two. Most people think a presidential is a preference, or I'm sorry, is a primary. And so who is eligible to vote and who is not? And likely the presidential preference election, as a Democrat, I'm expecting the Democrats to have chosen their nominee, which would be the current sitting president, although you never know. But we're expecting the Republican Party to have a presidential preference election, which, in past elections, when Trump was decided as the nominee, they skipped having the election. When Barack Obama, when in his reelection, when he was running, the Democrats skipped their election. So that's what we're expecting. But you must be registered in that party in order to participate in that specific election. For the primary election, independents can vote in whatever ballot they want to choose from, but they do have to let us know. We will not automatically send them a ballot.
This is Joe, and what a wonderful presentation. We've got questions coming in the chat room.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we got a question from Lori Cinnamon in the chat. She wonders if the Recorder's Office is engaged in voter registration activities in the community, such as naturalization ceremonies or any other kind of celebration or efforts to register people.
We have done that in the past. The naturalization ceremonies had been closed because of COVID. They have started back up, and we are in the process of getting back on that schedule and trying to be available to those voters. And we have outreach coordinators who are planning and working with different organizations to get out there more. So we do have 2 individuals dedicated in our office to outreach, although we're building a program. It's going a lot slower than we would like.
I do have a question of my own.
Sure.
In your coming years in office, I'm wondering what your blue sky projects are. What do you dream of making the Recorder's Office into?
I want to make the Recorder's Office. I want voters to think that voting is as easy and accessible as possible. I want ballot drop boxes. We're in the process of getting a mobile voting unit, which we'll use for outreach also. I want people to feel that they know where to go and what to do, and that it's easy. It's easy for people. The laws that we use to guide us are very complicated, and people's individual needs are very complicated. And so I want people to know, if I have this special situation because I'm in a submarine in the middle of some ocean, and I don't know when I'm going to have internet connectivity, that I can still vote. So I want people to know that situation. Or I had to go to a different state to take care of my parent who is ill, or I'm going to be in a cruise ship, or something like that. I want them to be able to know that they still have options and how to access those options. So that's what I'm hoping to see.
One last thing. We got a little late start today because of my technical issues. I was just wondering if you're having a hard out today.
No, I'm all yours.
Great, thanks. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, well, we have a question from George McGoffey.
Gabriella, thank you for being here today. This is George McGaffey from the Green Valley Democrats, and we have a lot of people coming in and asking questions, and your office was great in answering those questions, many of them over the phone. One question I had in particular is, we had a guy come in who wanted to change his votes. Does he dare open his ballot to do that, or what should he do to have done that?
Yeah, that's a really easy question. I help man the phones, and it's a very common question. Yes, it is not. You can make changes. It's not really going to matter to us. I'm not going to look at your envelope and think to myself, oh, this looks like it's been opened. Usually people will put a little piece of tape if they've opened it. It really depends on their comfort level. If they have made one tiny little change on, let's say, a proposition, they voted yes instead of no, and then realized it later, what they can do is they can either X out the wrong selection and bubble in the first. And what will happen is when they get to the elections department, so my office is not going to scrutinize, we're not going to look at any of that stuff. We're going to see that it's been taped. Sometimes people will sign over just to like, hey, this was me. It wasn't somebody tampering with my ballot. We're not really super concerned with that. That doesn't happen very often. But what'll happen is when it goes through the tabulator, the tabulator will see that there were 2 selections made when there only should have been 1. And that ballot will get pulled from the rest by a human being. And then it will be sent to a special board of 2 people, and they will remark that ballot using the ballot marking device that I showed you earlier. Or a person can come in and cast a ballot in person and get a replacement right here on the spot, or at one of our early voting sites. If they choose to do that, though, they cannot leave with that ballot. They must vote it on site.
The other question I have is, are you preparing for ranked choice voting in the future?
We are not preparing for that at this moment. That's a decision of the state legislature. I do support ranked choice voting just as a whole, but unfortunately, I don't make the decision about that format. That does need to come from the state legislature. But if so, I believe the most important part or the most complicated part of that is public education and making sure that our constituency understands the difference. And that's really, I think that might be the largest concern on my part. I want to make sure that if we have ranked choice voting, that we have public education dollars to convey that to the public.
George Beverly, unmute yourself and you have a question.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Kelly. The question I have is who validates where are the early drop boxes or early voting spots?
So my office makes the decision on where those locations are. We had used the prior administration's precedent of those locations. We are looking into maybe adjusting a few or adding a few locations. That is something that we're still in the very early stages of discussing at this point. But my office will make a decision on where those locations are. And of course, we need to find spaces that are adequate for that, places that can be secure, that are accessible, and that are okay with us being there for a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, or maybe 4. And so that's really, really difficult. We've had a lot of good success with libraries, and libraries being very hospitable to us. We're so thankful for Pima County libraries. But in some communities, there aren't those resources. So like the Thon-Otham Nation in particular, there is no public library. There is no Pima County library. So we have to find different alternatives for that. And it's a considerable amount of time for us to have, election day voting is one day. They drop off equipment on one day, and then they have just the one day of it's a sometimes 16-hour day, but really that's it. And then a day for pickup. That's not as big of an inconvenience as us being there for a full week plus emergency voting, which could be 6 days, could be 2 weeks, could be 3, could be 4. So it's a little more complicated, but my office is able to make those decisions, and we make that recommendation to the board, and the board of supervisors then approves it. I hope that's helpful.
Okay. And
I know that was a wonky one. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Susie Anderson has a question for us.
You were absolutely amazing with your staff. What I would like to know is how many other counties do the same kind of work that you do with volunteer poll watchers from each part, or independent, Republican, or Democratic. How many other counties follow this to give an opportunity to the public to see how it works?
Following precedent of the previous administration, we did not allow observers for our early voting sites, which, like I said, can be operated for minimum of a week, but maybe 2, 3, or 4 weeks at a time. However, because that does require an additional person to ensure that, if there's any situation, we're able to deal with that. And so there's also spacing issues, and there's just a lot that we've never had to do that for this office. What we do allow, and I think is actually the better thing, is I do allow observers at our country club facility, where the ballots are actually coming in, and they're being processed and they're being signature verified. And so we do allow people to come and observe that process. And I think it's really, it's more helpful for us because they're limited in who they can talk to, and it allows for more concentration of my staff to be able to do their work. And then the elections department, they have observers on election day only for their processes and for the tabulation process. So, we offer, between our office and their office, we offer quite a lot of opportunities for observing. And it depends on the county, whether or not they're going to observe early voting locations, but every single one is by statute required to have election day observation. And some of the requirements for tabulation observation as well. They literally cannot run some machines unless they have observers there. But that's a function of the elections department, and I'm not as familiar. I do not do tabulating. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Mike, Brian, what you got?
I do have a question of my own. We recently heard an announcement from Governor Hobbs. God, I love saying that. That she's going to be putting together a new commission on election integrity. Reviewing our election rules and procedures to make sure everything's good. I understand that's going to be a 10-person panel. I was wondering if you, as the Pima County Director, or any other county directors or elections departments, are going to be having their input heard on that commission.
We haven't heard too much information yet, but I will say that I am the vice chair of the Recorders Association for the state. The chair is Stephen Richer, Republican for Maricopa County. He and I work very closely together. We're very vocal within our association. And so we have I think we'll have, of course, more connection with the Secretary of State's office, but it's amazing. I can't tell you how amazing and how much peace of mind I have as a reporter, because Governor Hobbs, who was the Secretary of State, who we worked very closely with, took Bo Duell as her chief of staff, who was working at the Secretary of State's office, who's an elections expert, and Corey Lorick, and Jason Chavez, who's an expert in tribal election interactions, and Allie Bones, who was her chief deputy at the Secretary of State's office. So she took all these election experts, people that I would call and ask questions to about how to proceed with some really complicated election law. All of those people, she took them to the governor's office. And so we have election experts in the governor's office, and it is so exciting. I cannot tell you how exciting it is to see those names and be familiar with those people. And it gives me such a peace of mind. So I undoubtedly, we will those are our people. We have our people in the governor's office. I feel confident that they are going to want to seek our communication and opinion.
Katie Germany, if you would unmute yourself.
Katie.
Yes, Gabby, first of all, thank you for everything. I want you to know, and everyone on this call, that the sticker of Indigenous people coming through is on my grandson's books in Australia, which leads to my question. My son, of course, can vote. Is he really allowed to vote in all elections? We've had a few issues, which I'll work on, but that's offline. But can he really vote in all the elections? He's obviously a citizen.
Oh, yeah. So not only, please, I will make sure that if you have him call or send an email, after this phone call, we'll connect and I know how to connect with you directly. Yeah. But I'll get you the right person so that they can call and it really depends on their specific situation. They have to fill out a federal postcard application form, but it's very simple. And yes, anybody can vote from anywhere. They're a U.S. citizen, they're Pima County. Even if their parents have lived here and they have never lived here, but they are United States citizens who have a tie to a Pima County address, they're able to register. And actually, they're able to register as late as Election Day, 7 p.m. Of course, we don't recommend that because we have to then send them the ballot and they have to sign it and return it, and we have to have it within our possession by 7 p.m. But yes, we have there are federal protections for those voters, our international voters. Yes. And we want to connect, and we're trying to right now work on ways to better inform people of that. I like the example of, well, what if I'm on a cruise? Because I did have that real question last cycle from a friend of mine, and I'm like, yes, we have options. We can either email it to you, 45 days before the election. Gives them a larger window of time before if they're on the ocean and they don't have any internet connectivity, what good is an email going to do them, right? But if it's a 45-day extended time period, yes, if you have a special situation, we had people who were truckers who don't have a physical address any longer. However, they receive their mail in a certain area. Those types of situations, whatever weird situation you think you have, call our office because there's likely a solution.
Okay. Paul Stapleton Smith has a question. Paul, unmute yourself.
Thank you. And Gabriella, thank you for all of the peace of mind and all of the security that you've brought to us. What surprised you, sister, in this last election? What surprised you the most about voter behavior?
We were a little surprised with the number of people who chose to drop off their ballots late on Election Day. Like I said, there was 44,000 people who dropped off their ballots on Election Day, which means they're not part of that initial results. And so that was a push from the Republican Party to delay those for some strange reason. But I was, with all of the negative things that you hear on the news and all of the worry, I think the coolest thing or the most surprising realization that I had was that people are just excited and happy to be able to participate. When someone calls me and you talk with somebody who has this weird situation, like they're a trucker and they're, or they're going to be on a cruise ship and we can tell, oh, don't worry, we have a solution. People were so excited. And so even the people who were upset for, whatever reason, I didn't receive a ballot. Well, sir, you're not signed up for the active early voting list. Oh, okay, that makes sense. We're able to give people peace of mind. And good to know and feel that overall, even though you're hearing all these negative things about how people feel about elections, that really people are just excited to be able to participate.
So Lori, you have a question.
Right. Thank you. Hi, Gabby.
Hi.
I have a two-part question.
Sure.
And the first one you might have answered about inactive voters. They can vote? They're still on the list. Do they ever come off?
Yes. So again, going back to the active versus inactive voters, inactive voters are people who we have, when we send them mail, we have had it returned to us. So what immediately happens, if we have, and it could be returned because of the post, maybe you had a post office hold, or maybe your mailbox was too full, or it could be for any reason like that. But so what we will do is we will send another email, another paper letter saying, we received some mail back. If you need to update your address, please do so, because you cannot forward official election mail. But a regular piece of mail will be forwarded. So if you have moved but not updated your address, that is also something that could put you on that, start the initiation process for getting you on that inactive list. But so what'll happen is if we send 2 pieces of mail, and after a certain number of days, we have not received it back. I think it's 30 off the top of my head. 30 days, we have not received any response back. We haven't received a phone call. And we cannot change anything over the phone. We have to have it in writing with your signature. But at that point, if we have not heard back from the voter, and we don't know what's going on, we will put them in an inactive status. And that means anytime they call and we look at our portal, it'll pop up immediately that they have an action to do. So it's kind of like a suspense for them. But of course all they need to do is like, oh yeah, I'm still at that address, and nothing has changed. We can hear that, and we can
So the question,
change it. I know this, I'm getting to that. However, if they remain in an inactive status for 2 election cycles by by state law, we are required to then remove them from the list, at which point they will then have to re-register. And so because I've been in office now for officially 2 years, I was in January 2021, taking over after the 2020 cycle. And now we just passed another general election cycle, 2022. We are now preparing to remove people who are in an inactive status for 2 consecutive general election cycles. So because of that, we will be removing people very soon. It's under 65,000. It's a smaller number.
so the second part of the question is, I understand how people who go from inactive to not registered, not eligible to vote anymore when they're inactive. However, there are a lot of people whose mail does not get returned, who've moved. For example, numerous people who went to college and their parents still get their mail. Or for a variety of reasons, the mail does not get returned. Maybe they're not on the early voting list. So what is the process for the recorder removing people from the voter registration outside of the inactive 2 election cycles?
So this was a really big, and I'm blanking on which piece of legislation. We actually have some guidance on this on our website. This was two legislative cycles ago. They recently passed a law that requires us to remove people from the active early voting list, only the active early voting list. So not from the voter roll. So if after, it's really complicated, but it was 2022, 2023, 2024. If a person who was on the active early voting list had received if we have not received any ballots from that person, if they don't use their mail ballot that's mailed to them, maybe even it's a person who never uses that mail ballot and then goes and votes in person on election day, what we will do is after a certain number of cycles, we will then pull that data, and we're going to have to do that pretty soon, but it's new. So we're, it's a whole thing. But at that point, anyone who was not using their mail ballot, they will be removed from the active early voting list. And it's very easy to get back on. They can just either, sign up for it again, put in that request. They can do a one-time request. They can do it every time request, whatever they want to do. So that's one thing. And then the question that you're asking is, what about, somebody, my sister-in-law, her ex fiance, so she didn't marry this guy, and she's now married to somebody else. She says, I'm still getting this guy's mail at my house, and I don't want to talk to him. I don't want him to, I don't want to alert him of this. What do I do? And I said, well, you should be returning his mail. So we send out new ID cards. And like I said, as soon as we send back one piece, we'll send another letter. So she'll get another letter. We're actually trying to remove him right now. And I said, as soon as you get that, right on there, return to sender. This person does not live here. We will get that, and that'll put him on the inactive list. We, however, cannot just simply remove somebody like verbally, like, oh, my daughter doesn't even live here. We cannot make any changes to anybody's voter registration without their consent, without their written consent. However, if your daughter registers in California, we're part of a statewide database, and what most practices are, that jurisdiction will send us a notice, and we will then see that notice and be able to inactivate that voter and remove them or cancel their voter registration, depending on the jurisdiction, depending on what the situation is. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody could move to California and never update their Pima County, and they could still be voting here. But that is on the voter. They need to be able to vote with whatever their situation is, and that decision is private and is protected.
Gabriella, what a wonderful presentation. You're a truly a great leader, and we really honored to have you as recorder.
Thank you for having me. And